Welcome to the Center for Transformation Institute podcast, where we are uniting with therapists everywhere for personal and professional growth. Your journey starts here at the place therapists grow.
About 6 or 7 years ago, it was the first time that I went to Thrive Training, which is the premier training for the brain relational skills with Life Model. If you haven't checked it out, definitely should. thrivingtoday.org. Chris and Jen Quercy head that up, and it's actually Dr. Jim Wilder's brainchild in terms of helping us apply the latest neuroscience and our relationship with God to help our brains heal in relational attachment and connection. And I found that training to be super helpful. Just got back from my third time going, in that there's stages, but the first time I went was about 6 or 7 years ago, and I remember Jen Quercy, who is leading that track one, talking about the idea of earning secure attachment. And since then, I definitely have heard Dr. Siegel talk about that idea too, but basically that earning secure attachment has something to do with filling in our maturity gaps, that we're able to identify and fill in these gaps in our maturity growth that happen because of malfunctions in our childhood, our infancy, in our early adulthood, that impacted our ability to act out of the deepest place of maturity. So I remember hearing her say that and thinking, oh, wow, just excited that was even possible. I felt like a lightness in my body and a hope come into my heart that, wow, this is actually possible, that I don't have to be stuck with my gaps. I don't have to allow the impact of the trouble that happened in my own infancy and childhood, or the transgenerational trauma of my family line, prevent me from growing and solidifying a sense of growth and strength of maturity in my own life. So that's super encouraging. And so if you're listening and you're hearing this and that provides you some encouragement as well, listen on, because there's more to come, and there's so much excitement for me around this concept. My name is Monica Maurer. I am a licensed therapist. I'm also the director of the Center for Transformation Institute. We exist at CFT Institute to partner with therapists everywhere to offer some deeper understanding of the Life Model curriculum. The Life Model is a lifespan conceptualization where we begin to understand through the Life Model what it means to be fully alive. And it's a neurotheology curriculum, so we're able to connect our relationship with God with our understanding of neuroscience, and that's hence the term neurotheology. We're able to understand that, and that informs us into all that we have, that we possibly can connect to as humans in order to take ourselves to the next level of growth. So we're excited as therapists ourselves here at the CFT Institute to bring this curriculum to therapists everywhere, so that we can grow as therapists personally and apply that growth to our clients professionally. So this episode is going to be focused on the concept of filling in maturity gaps and what that means to fill in our maturity gaps. It's a little confusing that our bodies grow in maturity. You know, we can't stop the growth of our bodies. You know, when we go through puberty as a human, we're going through puberty. Nothing's going to stop that, and we will begin to look older. And I know, as an almost 50-year-old, I'm not so happy about the gray hairs that are coming my way, or the wrinkles, the fine lines and wrinkles that are starting to form on my face, or the way that my body is aging. But I can't stop it. I mean, I guess I could go get some plastic surgery or something, but overall, age is coming my way and I can't stop it. And I think it's something that we're all experiencing as humans. We're aging, and our bodies are going to continue to do that, like it or not. But when it comes to our psychological maturity, it's not as sure. It's not as steadfast. In fact, while our bodies grow, our psychological growth isn't automatic. There are certain things that have to happen in order for our growth to take place. And if those things don't happen, we will remain at a lower level of maturity. So it's kind of confusing. So I could be an adult parent or elder in terms of my age, but if those certain things didn't happen in my infancy, if those tasks didn't happen, if my parents or the community didn't give those things to me as an infant or a child, then I will have gaps in lower levels of maturity. And what Jen said at that training that day, the first time I heard it, what she said was, you will actually be an infant psychologically. You will be a child psychologically, even though you may look like in your body an adult parent or elder. And so we can call that a pseudo maturity, a pseudo elder, a pseudo parent, because I have low level gaps mixed with a higher level of age. And so that's something that I think annoys us about people when they have a high level age and a low level gap. I think even in terms of the issue of childhood sex abuse, when we have an adult perpetrating on a child, that is the ultimate immaturity. It's Dr. Wilder talks about that in one of his books, The Guide to Living with Men, where he says pedophilia is basically an adult with such a low level gap, such a low level infant gap, that they think everything is there for their use. Just like a baby crawls around and puts everything in their mouth, like a cord from a computer, or the dog's ball, or a bug. The whole world is there for them to consume. And that's the age and stage that someone who is perpetrating on a younger person never grew out of. That is the ultimate pseudo maturity, is that my age looks like this, but I'm still treating things as if they're for my consumption, and I'm not caring for or empathizing with or sharing pain with that younger person in order to prevent or protect them from the harm that I'm causing them. I'm not protecting others from myself, as Dr. Wilder would say. So pseudo maturity is a real problem in our culture, because we've got a lot of people who look older but who are not psychologically older, and who may be even able to act older in a lot of circumstances, but then when push comes to shove, when the going gets tough, when stressors come, all bets are off. We saw that with the COVID quarantines. When that happened and our society shut down, and then all this racial tension happened in our culture, there was such tension that rose in a lot of us, and we saw ourselves treating each other in ways that we weren't treating each other just a few weeks or a few months or a year or two before. The political tensions rose, and a lot of our maturity gaps started coming out with one another. We weren't able to contribute and connect with one another in the ways that we wanted to, and we started going into enemy mode, and our maturity gaps started coming out. And so when push comes to shove, when the going gets tough, when stressors come our way, this is what happens. And so as therapists, as people who are contributing to helping others, we want to earn maturity. We want to earn our secure attachment, as Jen Kersey taught me, as Dan Siegel talks about, so that we can actually be helpful to those who are coming across our path, to the other therapists, to our neighbors, to our friends, to our community. If we're earning a secure attachment, if we're earning that maturity, then we're going to actually be able to help culture instead of hinder culture. So another point to think about in terms of maturity gaps and the way that comes out is in terms of mental illness. And we know mental illness leads to addiction. So trauma leads to mental illness, attachment pain and injuries lead to mental illness, and that all leads to addiction. And so if we think about mental illness in terms of, I've heard Dan Siegel talk about this, it's like the spectrum of rigidity to chaos, right? Or chaos to rigidity. All mental illness can be seen on that spectrum. There's disorders of over control and there's disorders of under control. And so basically the whole DSM-5 can be conceptualized like that. Every single disorder, personality disorder, or mental illness, psychosis, can be seen through that lens of the brain going into a compensation of over control or a compensation of under control. And when that happens, the human brain spirals into some type of mental illness, whether that's anxiety, whether that's depression, whether it's a high energy emotion or a low energy emotional stuckness. That is what happens. That's how the maturity gap acts itself out. And oftentimes mental illness leads to addiction, and addiction is just a coping strategy for the rigidity or the feelings of rigidity or the feelings of chaos. It's a way to get what Life Model would call a pseudo joy in place. So whether it's an addiction to food, sex, spending, gambling, exercise, those are process addictions, or whether it is some type of a substance with a drug, alcohol, even over-the-counter medications, caffeine can even be considered a substance addiction. When we have those substance or process addictions that give us a dopamine release, it tricks our brain into thinking we're getting joy, but that's not true joy. And what Life Model helps us understand is the only place for actual true joy is in relationship. That relationship is the place where we find a dopamine release that satiates our soul. Because a substance or a process is going to leave us wanting more or needing higher levels of that thing to get the same level of dopamine released. And that's why addiction is progressive, and addiction will always increase. If I start off with a as a sex addiction therapist, we look at how that's first exposures to porn rush the dopamine to the brain, but then you're needing higher levels of intensity or higher levels of time spent doing or experiencing pornography, or going into higher levels of sex addiction, things that provide more dopamine to the brain. And that's why it's progressive, and people find themselves in a place they never thought they would go. I was listening to Exodus Cry's documentary on porn and how they talked about somebody ending up looking at child porn or acting out in a level 3 porn addiction where they're harming someone else with their addiction, and they never thought they would end up that way or in that space, but they did. But they did because of how their brain needed more dopamine to get that same response. If they didn't get the dopamine, then they would have to face the mental illness, right? They would have to face the rigidity or the chaos of their life and feel what they needed, what they were feeling, and metabolize those feelings. But if they don't have connection outside of themselves with God or others, if they don't have true joy, then their brain doesn't know how to deal with those feelings. And that's what I love about Life Model. That's what gets me so excited about Life Model, is it helps us understand. Even the book Joy Starts Here, a great resource if you have never read it. It's an amazing resource to understand, how does community, how does belonging bring me the joy I'm looking for? And what are the things that hinder that belonging? What are the things inside of myself? What are the ways I hold myself back? And what are the things in the greater community, in my family, in my circles of 3 or more, in my circles of 2 or 1 or 2, that hinder me from feeling and experiencing the kind of joy that actually satisfies the soul? Did you know that craving is a sign of attachment pain? If I'm craving a food or a substance or a Netflix series, watching TV and binging on that, it's actually a sign not that I need that substance or process, but that I need joyful connection with another human. Isn't that fascinating? What would happen if we stepped away from giving into our cravings and we acted opposite of that? There's my little DBT plug. If we act opposite of that craving and head into finding a person to connect to in a real way, or connecting to our Creator in a real way that actually satiates our soul. So I think as therapists, that's our responsibility, to step away from our cravings, to step away from pseudo maturity and acting out of our maturity gaps, and stepping into a place of being responsible with our connections and using our connections to form belonging in our lives in such a way that we're living in a place of joy. As Wilder says, we're expanding our capacity for joy. We're gaining joy strength so that we're living in that space of true joy, and then we're propagating that joy to others quickly. I mean, these things are, Wilder will say, these things are propagated 1/6 of a second at a time. That just interactions in the grocery store with somebody walking down the aisle and giving them a smile or a short story to the checkout clerk or to a neighbor or somebody we're passing on the sidewalk, much less our own children, or as therapists, our clients, or as pastors, the parishioners in our church, or our spouses, or our friends, much less those people we're spending a lot of time with. If we're filling in our gaps, we're learning to live in joy, we're going to be joy spreaders. And that is a very exciting truth. We have so much power. I believe this is what the gospel message is. I believe this is what the Great Commission is. It's filling in our maturity gaps. It's growing in the likeness of Christ, in that we're learning to love our enemies. We're learning to be compassionate to others who are not like us, who in the past may trigger our maturity gaps and our annoyance, but we're learning to cover that annoyance and be loving, even in our thoughts and our hearts and our minds, not in our private thinking. We're learning to be loving and gracious so that we're acting in ways that really spreads joy. And so if this is interesting to you, keep listening. Thank you so much for listening in, and I look forward to the next time we're together.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of The Place Therapists Grow. We hope you will join us next Monday. To expand your knowledge and continue your growth journey, go to cftinstitute.com and take our assessment. See you next time.